I just wanted to welcome you in a couple quick pieces of housekeeping. We just want to, at every session, thank our generous sponsors, corporate sponsors, and I should add, thank the committee because it was a lot of hard work. So in your book, it lists the sponsors and the committee members, and endless thanks all around. We do accept donations, and most importantly, we would love your feedback. There's a little feedback comment sheet at the back of the room. So as we build our ideas for next year, please let us know what you like and what you might like to see happen. I was going to say, we usually invite people to go check out the author tent, but it actually only went till 4, which is probably about the warmth that everyone could have handled. There was a good crowd there all day. The books for the authors are here, and after they speak, they'll be happy to sign for you. So please remember to silence your cell phones. Thank you so much for attending, and I just want to introduce Ellen Hildebrand, who will do the introductions for our authors. Ellen?
Hi, I'm Ellen Hildebrand. By its very nature, being a novelist is a lonely profession. You have to do it by yourself, with quiet, no one else around. I like to write actually out of my house, in fact, off this island if I can, because of, I hear my dishwasher and my laundry talking to me at home. So it's a very happy occasion anyway when I, as a novelist, am able to commune with other novelists, and that's one of the most wonderful things about festivals like this. I was fortunate enough in September of last year to have met both of our authors today. I met them in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, at the Bookmarks Festival there, and I was also even more fortunate to have spent some quality time with each of them alone. Martha Southgate and I had to find our way from the hotel to downtown Winston-Salem, and we were sort of looking at the large buildings, the tall buildings, and saying we must be walking this way. And we had a nice chat about what it's like to be both a mother of school-age children and a novelist. And Tom Perrotta and I forced myself on, well, that doesn't sound right. I introduced myself forcefully to Tom Perrotta at the at the reception on Friday night, and we proceeded to go out and have a wonderful time in downtown Winston-Salem. So again, we're so lucky to have these amazing novelists here. Martha Southgate is the author of 4 novels, including The Taste of Salt, Third Girl from the Left, The Fall of Rome, and Another Way to Dance. Third Girl from the Left won Best Novel of the Year from the Black Caucus of the Association of American Library Association. Her novel, The Fall of Rome, received the 2003 Alex Award from the American Library Association and was named one of the best novels of 2002 by the Washington Post. Tom Perrotta is the author of 6 novels and 1 book of short stories. His most recent novel is The Leftovers, which is about a suburban town muddling through the apocalypse. He also has written Little Children, which was made into a major motion picture starring Kate Winslet, and Election, which was starring Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon. Leftovers was named the best book of 2011 by O Magazine, Kirkus, Amazon, GQ, NPR, The Washington Post, and Ellen Hildebrand. It's one of my personal favorites from last year. So anyway, we are so lucky to have them here, and we are going to begin with Martha Southgate. Martha.
Can you hear me? It's good? Okay. Thank you so much to the organizers of the festival for having me. It's really lovely here. I used to go to that other island when I was younger. My mother had a dear friend who lived in New York, and they rented a house there, and we would drive from Cleveland, where I grew up, and where the protagonist of my novel lives. We take 2 days, drive from Cleveland, then go to Woods Hole, then go to Martha's Vineyard. But I treasure my memories of this part of the ocean. And I've had a great time here looking around and hanging out today, and going to spend some time tomorrow as well. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to read a little bit of the very beginning of the novel. Briefly, it's the story of a woman who's a marine biologist. Her name's Josie, and that's who you'll be hearing from. And she's wrestling with issues, sort of a number of them, from about her family of origin, about her feelings toward where she's from. She's from Cleveland, although she's not me, and where she fits in her professional life as well. So I don't need to say much more because this is the beginning, but I'm going to just jump in. Thanks. My mother named me after Josephine Baker. I think she was hoping I'd be more artistically inclined. The sort of woman who would sing as she swayed elegantly through the streets of Paris. The sort of woman men would write songs about. It didn't work out like that, though. I'm kind of tall, like Baker, and medium brown, like her. I can't sing, though, and I don't look too good in a skirt made out of bananas. To my knowledge, no one has ever written a song about me. Everybody calls me Josie. That feels more like my right name to me. My brother is nicknamed Tick because when he was little, he was such a fast and efficient crawler that my father said he was just like a little watch. Tick-tock, tick-tock. That got shortened to Tick, and it stuck. That's what everybody calls him. His given name is Edmund, after the poet Edmund Spenser. That was Daddy's idea, too. He could not get over The Fairy Queen. That was one of his favorite books. I've never read it. It looks too complicated to me. I was raised to respect books. The house was full of them. From the time I was little, it was drummed into our heads that books were almost the most important thing in the world, second only to getting a good education. So I read a lot of fiction's greatest hits. Either I had to for school, or I felt like I should, or Daddy told me to read them. I even enjoyed some of them, but they're not what I'm drawn to. When I read, I want it to be something I can use. So mostly I read monographs. I read texts. I read science and history. Mostly I read about what's happening in the ocean. That's enough to fill your mind for a lifetime. I'm happiest when I'm in the water. Since we've been working at Woods Hole, I don't get as much ocean time as I'd like. It's nothing like Oahu, where we used to live. The water here is murky and green. I dive to keep up my chops, but it can't match the pure blue pleasure of the Pacific. Sometimes I feel a little heartbroken to have left that behind. My field of study is the behavior of marine mammals, which, let me tell you, is not easy. The ocean doesn't just offer itself up to you. Here's a typical situation. I'm suspended in the bluest water you can imagine, an entire universe flitting past my ears. Something comes up behind me. It's big, it's black, it moves through the water like a dream, no earthly impediments. Then it's gone. What was it? That's what people don't understand about marine biology, how extraordinary it is that we know what we know. And given all that we suspect is under the sea, believe me, we don't know much. How can you study something that you can't observe at length? How can you track data on a creature you didn't know existed until a year ago? How can you truly get to know an environment that you can't live in, that you have to have all kinds of equipment even to spend any time in? It's a miracle of my work, of our work, that we're able to know anything at all. The life beneath us is so unfathomable, and we treat it with such disdain. This Woods Hole job is a good one. I couldn't say no, and neither could my husband, Daniel. They offered us both these amazing fellowships, and this is Daniel's hometown. But how I miss the warm silence of that part of the Pacific, the things that would surprise me when they swam past my waiting shoulder. The way I got into this work was through my love of the water. I've always known it was where I belonged. Given that I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, home of one of the least inspiring of the not all that interesting Great Lakes, I've had to work pretty hard to get to where I belong, but I did it. Right after college, my Stanford marine biology degree in hand, I got an unpaid internship at the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago, working with the marine mammals. I worked in a Starbucks at night, and I ate a lot of ramen noodles for those 5 months, but I was the happiest I've ever been. It was a lot of hauling heavy objects around, a lot of cleaning up, a lot of tank maintenance. But I got to work with the dolphins sometimes and touch their smooth gray skin. They felt like heaven to me. And then, a miracle. When my 20 weeks were up, one of the full-time animal behaviorists quit, and they asked me to stay on. The job allowed me to get to know the dolphins, their personalities, their quirks, everything about them. I loved them, I really did, almost the way you'd love a person. It was easier to love them than to love a person. The shed is spectacular. It was built in 1929. The ceiling is like that of a cathedral, but it's covered with images of sea life instead of Jesus. Simple, earnest paintings of starfish and turtles and whales. There are seashells in bas relief and pillars everywhere. The whole building has that temple-like grandeur that public buildings of that era have. Every day I walked in looking up over my head, open-mouthed, like a little kid. The great thing about the job was getting to be in the water nearly every day. My favorite part was after I had all my dive equipment on, rolling in backwards and letting the water close over my head. The air coming into me from the oxygen tank on my back, so that I was buoyed up and breathing, even though there's water all around me. I would cut through it, and the fish would swim up and hover around me like jewel-colored birds or butterflies over a field. I loved being underwater, but still being safe, held, protected. I love the weightlessness. I never feel that the rest of the time. Life weighs a ton. That's why I love the water. Nothing weighs anything there. All the other women who had the gig were white, and they only had to snatch their hair back into messy ponytails before they dived. I had cornrows at the time. I hadn't yet seen that I had to cut off all my hair and let my head be free. It took me a year to realize it and to get up the nerve to deal with my mother's disapproval. But I finally did. After my first trip to the barber shop, I never looked back. I looked like a sculpture, a beautifully shaped piece of wood. I started to wear big earrings all the time when I wasn't diving, inexpensive silver hoops, and flashy teenage girl sparklers. Now I buy earrings at this shopping mall chain where I'm usually at least 10 years older than anyone else in there. I cut my hair myself once a week with clippers. Sometimes I run my hand over the short, assertive bristles up there, and it makes a little shiver go down my legs. I'm never growing it back, never. Not too many black people work at Woods Hole. The official name is Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, but no one calls it that. There are some black interns and postdocs, but I'm the only black senior scientist there. It's always like that. Black scientists, particularly marine biologists, are very rare. A lot of black people raised the way I was, in cities, which is most of us, don't like the water. Or perhaps I should say, they never find out whether they'd like it or not. Why? A million reasons, dating back hundreds of years. Hair, money, time, lack of opportunity. It's a shame. I can't imagine what my life would be like if I'd never been given the chance to know the water. Thank God my mother was different, though she didn't swim herself. We were off to the Y at a young age, but all she ever did at the pebbly freshwater beach of Lake Erie was worry that her hair was going back or getting blown around too much. And my father? He wore Oxfords to the beach. We have photographic evidence. In the only picture we have of him on such a trip, his head is lowered and he's scowling at the sand. Not long after that photograph was taken, he stopped going at all. I don't know what you see in it, Josie. The sand gets all up under your toenails and in your socks. Takes a week or two to get out. Gets all over everything. Plus, it's too damn hot. You can have it. Tick never really got why I love the water so much either, but he would always go with me. He went down to Lake Erie near our house with me whenever I wanted. He'd sift rocks through his fingers and watch me gather up samples by the shoreline. I've done that since I was about 8. I used one of those dime store buckets until my mother finally got me a proper collection set. After I got to be a really good swimmer and I was old enough to drive, he'd go out to the beach at Edgewater or sometimes even way out to Mentor Headlands with me too. But he never wanted to spend the kind of time in the water that I did. He went because he loved me. Daniel, my husband, is white. I don't know why I announced that, except it's the first thing you notice, especially around here, the two of us. People don't disapprove, but they do notice. Well, here's the other reason I say it, because I noticed it myself. I've been with other white guys, not that many black guys to tell the truth, just one in grad school. It didn't work out for a lot of reasons. But sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to make a life with someone who looked more like me, maybe had lived more like me. I know race isn't the way to make these decisions, but in my secret heart, sometimes, I just wish Daniel knew certain things, certain sounds, certain feelings in a way he just can't. Unlike most of our colleagues, we actually live in Woods Hole. Having property is part of what made us decide to come. Daniel's mother died a few years ago and left him the house. His father was already gone. He died in a boating accident when Daniel was 10. The house needed a lot of work, but is now worth quite a bit. When they were building the institution in the 1930s, land was 50 cents an acre. Daniel's parents didn't get for that cheap, but it was cheap. Anyway, those days are long gone. For most of us scientists who are hustling for grants when we aren't working on studies and who never get paid that well, this town is way out of reach. Anyway, Daniel. He is kind, precise, and quiet. I was drawn to those things about him. I try to be precise, but it doesn't come naturally. He's a couple of years older than I am, an ichthyologist. He loves sorting species, classifying them. Me, I'm pleased to see a really rare specimen of something, but I'm not as moved by the idea of collecting. Daniel's voice softens when he says fish names. Parrotfish, tarpon, gar. Sometimes I think I married him because his voice softened the same way when he said my name. Josie, squirrelfish, blue tang. He came along when I'd pretty much given up on men as a gender. I mean, they are the ones I prefer sexually. In college, I was with women a few times, but it wasn't for me. But I found them impossible in every other way. I couldn't get them, their behaviors. When Daniel came along, I was dating a bartender who enjoyed his wares a bit too much. Our relationship was on its last unsteady legs. I don't even quite know how I got involved with a guy like that. He was good in bed. He had the kind of authority that you sometimes find in men who don't think too much. That can keep you going for a while, but not forever. Daniel came along, same field, same smarts, those kind blue eyes that could not stop gazing at me. What could I say? What could I do? I went with him. I loved him. I love him. There's this hollow place. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, did I skip some? No, okay. There's this hollow place in me, this place that needs to be alone, this place that vibrates and can't sit still. My work requires me to be still, but sometimes, in my heart, I feel that toe impatiently tapping, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Lonely, scared. I don't know how to explain that to anyone. I'm not sure how to explain it to myself. I've been like this for as long as I can remember. Sure that it's never going to work out. Sure that it's all my fault. What is, you ask? Everything. Everything that's ever gone wrong in my life or the life of anyone I've loved. A therapist would say that's standard issue for someone who grew up like I did. Classic adult child of an alcoholic stuff. Yeah, I know the lingo. But so what? Given that, what am I supposed to do? I have to go on from where I am. That's why I don't look back. That's why I put it all behind me. Put them all behind me, my family. They live in Cleveland. They don't understand about the ocean. And that means they don't understand about me. Okay, that's it. Thank you. I'm staying up here just to say that, well, after Tom's reading, we're going to stay for a little bit and answer questions if you'd like. Just want to throw that out there. Okay.
Oh, thanks, Martha. That was wonderful. It's a real pleasure to be here in Nantucket. I think I met Wendy at a bookseller's breakfast this year, and she mentioned this possibility of a festival here in a kind of very speculative way. So it's really nice to actually be here and see that you did it so quickly and so well. It's been a really terrific festival and weekend. So I'm going to read from The Leftovers, which is my new book, and it's got a sort of big concept that I'll explain very, very briefly. Basically, there's an event that is something like the Christian rapture. Basically, millions of people throughout the world disappear in a single moment. The problem for the world and for Christians in particular is it doesn't seem to discriminate on the basis of religion. It seems to be a random disappearance. And basically the book follows this one family in a town called Mapleton. And I'm going to read to you a section about Lori Garvey, who is the wife and mother in this family. And one of the things that happens, because there's this event that seems sort of to have some kind of spiritual and religious significance, but doesn't seem to make sense in terms of existing religious schemes, is this kind of space opens up for new religions. And a big part of the book is following three kind of cults that germinate in the wake of this event. And I'm just going to read about one of them. Here's the first mention of them in the book. You started seeing them around town the following autumn. People in white clothing, traveling in same-sex pairs, always smoking. Lori recognized a few of them. Barbara Santangelo, whose son was in her daughter's class. Marty Powers, who used to play softball with her husband and whose wife had been taken in the rapture, or whatever it was. Mostly they ignored you, but sometimes they followed you around as if they were private detectives, hired to keep track of your movements. If you said hello, they just gave you a blank look. But if you asked a more substantive question, they handed over a business card printed on one side with the following message: "We are members of the guilty remnant. We have taken a vow of silence. We stand before you as living reminders of God's awesome power. His judgment is upon us." In smaller type, on the other side of the card, was a web address you could consult for more information: www.guiltyremnant.com. So Lori is really shaken up by this event. She doesn't lose anyone in her family, but her best friend's daughter, who's 12 years old, disappears. And Lori just can't get her mind around it, and she ends up joining the guilty remnant. And I'm just going to read to you a section that's just a sort of ordinary night in the cult. The only thing that's not ordinary is that Lori is training a young woman named Meg. This is part of her job, is to bring new people in. And so she's teaching Meg the ropes. And so they're basically doing what I described before. They're dressed in white, and they're sort of spying on a particular person that they've been assigned to spy on. They crouched behind some bushes on Russell Road, peering through the foliage at the front door of a white colonial with a brick sun porch that belonged to a man named Stephen Grice. There were lights on both downstairs and up, and it seemed likely that the Grice family was in for the night. Even so, Lori decided to sit tight for a while. It would be a lesson in persistence, the most important quality a watcher could cultivate. Meg shifted beside her, hugging herself to ward off a chill. "Damn," she whispered, "I'm freezing." Lori pressed a finger to her lips and shook her head. Meg grimaced, mouthing the word "sorry." Lori shrugged, trying not to make too big a deal of it. This was Meg's first shift on the night watch. It would take some time for her to get used to it. Not just the physical hardship and the boredom, but the social awkwardness, the rudeness even, of not being able to fill the silence with conversation, of more or less ignoring the person who was breathing right next to you. It went against every social impulse that had been drummed into you as a child, especially if you were a woman. And yet, Meg would get used to it, just as Lori had. She might even come to appreciate the freedom that came with silence, the peace that followed surrender. That was the one thing Lori had learned the winter after the rapture, when she'd spent all that time with Rosalie Sussman. When your words are futile, you're better off keeping them to yourself, or never even thinking them in the first place. A car turned off Monroe onto Russell, catching them in a silvery wash of light as it rumbled by. The hush seemed deeper in its wake, the stillness more complete. Lori watched a leaf from a nearly bare maple topple through the glow of a street lamp and drop soundlessly onto the pavement. But the perfection of the moment was overtaken by the bustle of Meg rooting around in her coat pocket. After what sounded like a prolonged struggle, she extracted her notebook and scrawled a brief question, barely legible in the moonlight. "What time is it?" Lori raised her right arm, tugging at her sleeve and tapping several times on her watchless wrist, a gesture meant to convey the idea that time was irrelevant to a watcher, that you had to empty yourself of expectations and sit quietly for however long it took. If you were lucky, you might even come to enjoy it, to experience the waiting as a form of meditation, a way of connecting with God's presence in the world. Sometimes it happened. There had been nights over the summer when the air seemed infused with divine reassurance. You could just close your eyes and breathe it in. But Meg looked frustrated, so Lori took out her own pad, something she'd been hoping not to do, and wrote a single word in big block letters: patience. Meg squinted at it for a few seconds, as if the concept were unfamiliar, before venturing a small nod of comprehension. She smiled bravely as she did so, and Lori could see how grateful she was for this little scrap of communication, the simple kindness of a reply. Lori smiled back, remembering her own training period, the feeling she had of being completely isolated, cut off from everyone she'd ever loved, a loneliness made even harder by the fact that she'd chosen it of her own free will. It hadn't been an easy decision, but in retrospect, it seemed not only right, but inevitable. Rosalie is the friend whose daughter disappeared, and Rosalie joined first, so I just want to explain that. After Rosalie joined the GR, Lori had done her best to reclaim her life as a wife and mother and involved citizen. For a little while, it felt like a blessing to escape the force field of her best friend's grief, once again doing yoga and volunteer work, taking long walks around the lake, monitoring Jill's homework, worrying about Tom, and trying to repair her relationship with her husband, who made no secret of the fact that he'd been feeling neglected. But that sense of liberation didn't last for long. She told her therapist that it reminded her of coming home this summer after her freshman year in college, stepping back into the warm bath of family and friends, loving it for a week or two, and then feeling trapped, dying to return to school, missing her roommates and her cute new boyfriend, the classes and the parties and the giggly talks before bed, understanding for the first time that that was her real life now, that this, despite everything she'd ever loved about it, was finished for good. Of course, what was missing this time around wasn't the excitement and romance of college. It was the sadness she'd shared with Rosalie, the oppressive gloom of their long silent days, sorting through photographs of Jen, taking the measure of a world that no longer contained this sweet and beautiful girl. It had been horrible living inside that knowledge, accepting its brutal finality, but it felt real in a way that paying the bills didn't, or planning the spring library benefit, or reminding yourself to pick up a box of linguine at the supermarket, or congratulating your own daughter on the 92 she got on a math quiz, or waiting patiently for your husband to finish grunting and extract himself from your body. That was what she'd needed to escape now. The unreality of pretending that things were more or less okay, that they'd hit a bump on the road and should just keep on going, attending to their duties, uttering their empty phrases, enjoying the simple pleasures that the world still insisted on offering. And she'd found what she was looking for in the GR, a regimen of hardship and humiliation that at least offered you the dignity of feeling like your existence bore some sort of relationship to reality, that you were no longer engaged in a game of make-believe that would consume the rest of your life. I'm going to skip up part. Basically, they follow Grice to the supermarket, but don't find him. It was way past midnight when they got back to the compound. slipping between two concrete barriers and signing in at the Sentry House. They'd been assigned a bedroom on the third floor of Blue House, which was reserved for female trainees. Lori normally lived in Gray House, the women's dorm next door, where an average-sized room accommodated as many as 6 or 7 people, all of them in sleeping bags on a bare floor. Every night was a somber, adults-only slumber party. No giggles or whispers, just lots of coughing and farting and snoring and groaning. The sounds and smells of too many stressed-out people packed into too small a space. Blue House was highly civilized by comparison, almost luxurious. Just the two of them in a child-sized room with twin beds and pale green walls, a soft beige carpet that felt good against your bare feet, and best of all, a bathroom across the hall. A little vacation, Lori thought. She got undressed while Meg was showering, exchanging her dirty clothes for a loose-fitting GR nightgown, an ugly but comfortable garment sewn from an old sheet, and then knelt to say her prayers. She took her time, focusing on her children, and then moving down the list to Kevin, her mother, her siblings, her friends and former neighbors, trying to visualize every one of them in white garments and bathed in the golden light of forgiveness, as she'd been taught to do. It was a luxury to pray like this in an empty room with no distractions. She knew that God didn't care if she was kneeling or standing on her head, but it just felt better to do it right. Her mind clear and her attention undivided. Thank you for bringing Meg to us, she prayed. Give her strength and grant me the wisdom to guide her in the right direction. The night watch had gone pretty well, she thought. They'd lost track of Grice and hadn't run into anyone else whose files they'd reviewed. But they saw a fair amount of action in the town center, accompanying people from bars and restaurants to their cars, and walking home with a trio of teenage girls who chatted cheerfully among themselves about boys and school, as if Lori and Meg weren't even there. They'd had only one unpleasant encounter with a couple of 20-something jerks outside the extra inning. It wasn't horrible, just the usual insults and a crude sexual invitation from the drunker of the two, a good-looking guy with an arrogant grin who put his arm around Meg as if she were his girlfriend. "I'll take the pretty one," he told his buddy. "You can have Grandma." But even that was a useful lesson for Meg, a little taste of what it meant to be a watcher. Sooner or later, someone would hit her or spit on her, or worse, and she'd have to be able to endure the abuse without protesting or trying to defend herself. Meg emerged from the bathroom, smiling bashfully, her face pink, her body lost inside her tent-like nightgown. It was almost cruel, Lori thought, draping a lovely young woman in such a dull and baggy sack, as if her beauty had no place in the world. "It's different for me," she told herself. "I'm just as happy being hidden." The water in the bathroom was still warm, a luxury she no longer took for granted. In Gray House, there was a chronic lack of hot water. It was inevitable, with so many people living there. But regulations required 2 showers a day regardless. She stayed in for a long time, until the air was thick with steam, which wasn't much of a problem since the GR prohibited mirrors. It still felt weird to her, brushing her teeth in front of a blank wall, using chalky no-name paste and a crappy manual brush. She'd accepted most of the hygiene restrictions without complaint. It was easy to see why perfumes and conditioners and anti-aging creams might be considered extravagances, but she remained unreconciled to the loss of her electric toothbrush. She'd pined for it for weeks before realizing that it was more than the sensation of a clean mouth that she missed. It was her marriage, those years of mindless domestic happiness, long crowded days that culminated with her and Kevin standing side by side in front of the dual sinks, battery-operated wands buzzing in their hands, their mouths full of minty froth. But that was all over. Now it was just herself in a quiet room, her fist moving doggedly in front of her face. No one smiling into the mirror. No one smiling back. During the training period, the vow of silence wasn't absolute. There was a brief interlude before lights out, usually no more than 15 minutes, when you were allowed to speak freely, to verbalize your fears, and ask any questions that had gone unanswered during the day. The unburdening was a recent innovation, meant to function as a kind of safety valve, a way to make the transition to not talking a little less abrupt and intimidating. "So how you doing?" Lori asked, just to get the ball rolling. Her own voice sounded strange to her, a rusty croak in the darkness. "Okay, I guess," Meg replied. "Just okay?" "I don't know. It's hard to walk away from everything. I still can't believe I did it." "You seemed a little nervous at the Safeway." "I was afraid I was going to see somebody I knew." "Your fiancé?" "Yeah, but not just Gary, any of my friends." Her voice was a bit wobbly, like she was trying hard to be brave. "I was supposed to get married this weekend." "I know." Lori had read Meg's file and understood that she was going to require some special attention. That must have been hard. Meg made a funny sound, something between a chuckle and a groan. "I feel like I'm dreaming," she said. "I keep waiting to wake up." "I know what that's like," Lori told her. "I still feel like that sometimes." "Tell me a little about Gary. What's he like?" "Great," Meg said. "Really cute. Broad shoulders, sandy hair, this sweet little cleft in his chin. I used to kiss him there all the time." "What's he do?" "He's a securities analyst. Just got his MBA last spring." "Wow, he sounds impressive." "He is." She said it matter-of-factly, as if there weren't any room for debate. "He's a great guy, smart, good-looking, lots of fun, loves to travel, goes to the gym every day. My friends call him Mr. Perfect." "Where'd you meet?" "In high school. He was a basketball player. My brother was on the team, so I went to a lot of games. Gary was a senior, and I was a sophomore. I didn't think he even knew I was alive. And then one day, he just walked up to me and said, 'Hey, Chris's sister, you want to go to a movie?' Can you believe that? He didn't even know my name, and he asked me on a date." "And you said yes?" "Are you kidding? I felt like I won the lottery." "You hit it off right away?" "God, yeah. The first time he kissed me, I thought, this is the boy I'm going to marry." "Well, it took you long enough," Lori said. "That must have been, what, 8 or 9 years ago?" "We were in school," Meg explained. "We got engaged right after I graduated, and then we had to postpone the wedding because of what happened." "You lost your mother." "It wasn't just her. One of Gary's cousins, 2 girls I knew in college, my father's boss, a guy Gary used to work out with, a whole bunch of people. You remember what it was like." "I do. It just didn't feel right getting married without my mother. We were really close, and she was so excited when I showed her the ring. I was going to wear her wedding dress and everything." "And Gary was okay with the postponement?" "Totally. Like I said, he's a really nice guy." "So you rescheduled the wedding?" "Not right away. We didn't even talk about it for 2 years, and then we just decided to go for it." "And you felt ready this time?" "I don't know. I guess I just finally accepted the fact that my mother wasn't coming back. Nobody was. And Gary was starting to get impatient. He kept telling me that he was tired of being sad all the time. He said my mom would have wanted us to get married, to start a family. He said she would have wanted us to be happy." "What did you think?" "That he was right. And I was tired of being sad all the time, too." "So what happened?" Meg didn't speak for a few seconds. It was almost like Lori could hear her thinking in the dark, trying to formulate her answer as clearly as she could, as if a lot depended on it. "We made all the arrangements, you know. We rented a hall, picked out a DJ, interviewed caterers. I should have been happy, right?" She laughed softly. It felt like I wasn't even there, like it was all happening to someone else, someone I didn't even know. Look at her designing the invitations. Look at her trying on the dress. I remember that feeling, Lori said. It's like you're dead and you don't even know it. Gary got mad. He couldn't understand why I wasn't more excited. So when did you decide to bail out? It was on my mind for a while, but I kept waiting, hoping it would get better. I went to a therapist, got medication, did a lot of yoga, but nothing worked. Last week I told Gary that I needed another postponement, and he didn't want to hear it. He said we could get married or we could break up. It was my choice. And here you are. Here I am, she agreed. We're glad to have you. I really hate the cigarettes. You'll get used to them. I hope so. Neither one of them spoke after that. Lori rolled onto her side, savoring the softness of the sheets, trying to remember the last time she'd slept in such a comfortable bed. Meg only cried for a little while, and then she was quiet. Thanks. So Martha's going to come up. We're going to bring chairs. You want to sit?
Talk flat like this, can you hear us? Yeah.
Okay.
I used to text, I'm sorry.
Should we say higher chairs? Oh, we're good. Okay. I actually have a question for you before they start. It's probably going to be asked a lot, but the concept is a very high concept, but it's also kind of amazing. I wondered what in the culture, or did it just come to you one day, or where did you're probably sick of answering this, but writing a book like that, you're getting a lot.
I think a lot. So,
Yeah.
so my last book was called The Abstinence Teacher, and to do that, and to write that book, I had to do a lot of research into contemporary evangelical Christian culture, and just kept running into the rapture and the end times, and realized that there are a lot of people among us who are just really expecting that to happen in their lifetime. I'm a pretty secular person. I've raised Catholic, where that concept doesn't really come into play. So I just got really fascinated by it, and I think it's easy to just fend off beliefs that aren't your own if you want to, but the fiction writer in me just found myself unable to get it out of my mind. And the thing that I thought about was that it is an apocalyptic scenario, but it's also just a metaphor for life, meaning that we all live in the aftermath of loss, of people who once were an everyday part of our lives who are just gone. And so it was funny. So you have the high concept, and you can treat it that way, but then you can also treat it as just a story about, grief in a concentrated collective form. And that's sort of what it became. But now I have a question for you.
Okay.
Which is,
then we'll get to you guys. Go ahead.
Which is, it's interesting to write a book about. I'm assuming you're not a scientist.
No, not at all.
And I figured to successfully impersonate one as a first-person narrator, you've got to do a pretty serious amount of research. And was that daunting? Was that fun?
It was mostly pretty fun. I don't know if I should confess this. I did less than you might think. But here's why. As the book goes on, it really isn't about her being a scientist. So it was important to get certain details right. Also, things happened while I was writing it. I happened to be in Chicago over the years it took to write it, and that's how I saw the shed. And it is, if you're ever in Chicago, it's an astonishing building. So things like that came in, but then I did do research. I talked to a marine biologist. I went on a little tour of Woods Hole, which is fascinating. It's really an amazing place. And I talked to where the first kernel of the book came from a coworker at Essence Magazine where I used to work, whose husband was an ichthyologist, and him and Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astronomer, were the only African American, or black, he was from the islands, scientists in the American Museum of Natural History, which, as you might imagine, has a lot of people working at it. So I interviewed, so I was fascinated by that, by the isolation, by what a weird job. I'd never heard of it before. And so I was fortunate enough, I think he's the first person I interviewed, to talk with him about the job and what the work and what's required, but also to go into the basement of the museum. And it's like a wonderland. They have fish samples going back to the 1800s with little people's handwriting on them. So yeah, it was fun to learn all that stuff, and I felt like I had a solid enough grounding in it. But if you choose to read the book, you'll see a lot of non-fish related things happening in the book. So,
I have to ask you both a question. You both written multiple books. And I wonder, how long do you allow yourself, or when do you allow yourself to start thinking about the next book before your other book is done? After your other book is done, where does that come along?
Well, when I was starting as a writer, I was a story writer. And story writers are scavengers. They have little notebooks, and you're always, everything that happens, you think, can I write a story about that? Can I write a story about that? And it was actually a bad way for me to go, because my mind... No, I was a short story writer. But it's probably similar to a journalist, where you're just kind of, anything, because you don't have to commit to it forever. Anything is potentially a story. And I discovered that I worked much better as a novelist, where if I just had one idea and could live with it for a long time, that I was sort of more at peace. Wasn't always thinking about, the next one. The problem with that, of course, is that at some point while you're working on this book, some other idea will have to start, waving at you, from deep in your subconscious. And, that sometimes would happen after I finished, or, I don't know. The good part of it is you're writing a lot of novels is you don't have to have a lot of ideas. You just have to have one idea. And that has worked really well for me up to right about now. I for whatever reason, I'm idealist, and it's a very disconcerting thing. I don't really know what the next thing is, and now I'm back like that story writer. Is that a novel? Is that a novel?
My experience is somewhat similar. I didn't write short stories though, so and I've also had kids the whole time I've been writing professionally. At least writing fiction. I used to be a journalist. And for me, it seems to be sort of, well, it depends which book you're talking about, but kind of the holes in between. Like I do, when I finish one, when I'm writing one, I'm thinking about that one. I don't think I've ever had the idea for the next one while I'm actively writing one. But there's a lag between publication and writing, and often that's where things come to me. And I have to admit, the first 3 books, or certainly the first 2 before this one, The Fall of Rome and Third Girl from the Left, were both cannibalized from student writings of mine, But one was started actually as an exercise in a short story writing in a fiction class that I took. There's millions of them in New York when I first moved there, and it was a couple of pages, and the first paragraph is still the same. It grew from there. So when I thought, what's next, I had this thing. It was kind of like keeping a notebook. I had this thing that I was still interested in. And then the other, Third Girl from the Left, grew out of a short story that I wrote in grad school. It did get published, but again, I went back to it, and many things are different in turning to a novel. Then I'm working on a book now that was the first time it ever kind of came to me like eureka. That is not usually how it goes. I was at MacDowell, this artist colony, without much of an idea what I was going to do. And I really love ballet and had always been interested in a particular narrative in the life of George Balanchine and Suzanne Farrell. And somebody was giving a lecture about partnerships and how people work together. And while he was talking, it just sort of, and then through another conversation the next day, it just sort of came together. It's not, I mean, not the book, but how I might approach it. And it was really, to have kind of a eureka moment was really amazing. So I don't know if that'll ever happen again. It was kind of awesome though, yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm. Is there another hand?
I'm curious to know more about the book you read from, the kernel of where the story began and the struggle of your main.
Well, as I said, the kernel actually was completely unrelated to what it ended up being about. I do love water, but I'm not a scientist. But I was interested in this woman who's working kind of in isolation within her field. Not many women scientists, certainly not many African American scientists. And also the water thing, that's really true about African Americans, that because of the urban thing, you know, in New York, there's just a piece in the Times this week about how many people drown every summer because they don't know how to swim. Anyway, so that was the initial thing. And then as I kept working with it, you know, it's not directly autobiographical, but like many of us within my larger family, there has been alcoholism. And I started thinking about someone who had, you know, attempted through this very different life to leave her family behind. It's a process. I mean, you know that too. You might sit down and think, okay, this is it. And then you start writing and it starts to morph. So there's not much else to say about that. It took like 4 years, and things also happen while you're writing it. As I said, for example, this visit to the shed, or you just have incidents or ideas that, or literally sometimes I'll be sitting there and I'll write something and I'll think, oh, should I keep that? I really don't know it's coming when I sit down. I imagine that's your experience too, but that's how it goes, kind of. Do you find that you just write something?
I've learned that all I need is enough to get started.
Right.
Because any long-term plan is purely provisional.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I never know how they're going to end.
Yeah. And in fact, if you did, and you actually stuck to it, something would have gone wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
For Tom, the little children, and from what you read in this new book, and the abstinence teacher, the major characters are women who are unfulfilled. I mean, the abstinence teacher does have a job, but the other two women seem discontent and lost in the role that they find themselves in. And are you planning to write a book about a man and then in the same context?
Well, it's very interesting. I think I have. In Election, the main character is a male teacher who is, sort of chafing at what he perceives as kind of the smallness of his life, and he of course blows it up. I mean, for me, it's like, I guess. First, I would say, if you're going to write a novel, you're probably going to be writing about unfulfilled characters, because all you could do with a fulfilled character is sort of destroy them, right? I mean, the idea of a novel of somebody who has a really great life, that's Job. They need a smack, I think. So I think I'm really drawn as a novelist to characters who are looking for something. Sometimes something that they can't define, but a character without desire, I think, would be really difficult to write. So I think. What's interesting, I think, is that I have been so drawn to writing women characters, because I think early in my career I was considered a guy's writer. I would be occasionally grouped with Nick Hornby and some other people. There was almost like this idea that there was this lad lit that was, a kind of counterpart to chick lit or something. And then I, for some reason, around little children, I started to find myself really interested in writing about women characters. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but I think it's allowed the books to be bigger, for one thing. It's allowed me to write books with the abstinence teacher is a male main character and a female main character. Leftovers of Family Saga, 2 female characters, 2 male characters. It's just been a nice thing to break through, because early in my career I was somewhat worried about that. And I think I went to college and grad school at exactly the wrong time, when there was just this sense of, identity is a very powerful and sometimes exclusive thing, and you may not want to cross gender, race, ethnic boundaries as a writer, that's like you might be appropriating somebody else's experience in a way that is politically suspect. And I think it took me a while to just say, well, to function as a writer, I have to take that risk.
Just to add to it, maybe it's because I'm a man, and I thought Kevin was as much a central character in Leftovers as his wife.
Yeah.
And yet he's sort of not the mirror image, the counter image of what she goes through, how he deals with it, because he wants to keep the same way of living.
Yeah.
Desperately to keep that kind of life, which is impossible to do in this new world. Very hard.
Yeah, no, that's right. I like the idea that I mean that's hard to do. I think when you have a multi-character story to try and give them all sort of equal, or whatever. I don't know what equal is the right word, but to give them substantial arcs and to devote as much time to them and have them be centers of gravity within the story.
And it's the reader that focuses on whoever character.
Yeah, well, interestingly, right, the paperback edition of this book, as you'll see there are 2 covers. There's a cover with a man's shoes on him and a cover with a woman's shoes. And I really think this was my publisher thinking that people do make unconscious or conscious decisions, that they see a woman sees a man's shoes on the book and thinks, so that's not necessarily going to intersect with my experience and my interests. And anecdotally, women seem to be drawn to the book with the women's shoes on it.
I mean, I was going to read it anyway, but I have to say, when I picked it up, and what difference does it make to me? I know I bought the one with the heels on it. It's like instinctive. It was really weird. I was surprised.
It's a little marketing experiment.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
I was really interesting what you said about the sort of cultural appropriation. I was wondering what you think about that, Martha, someone who race figures in your writing one. And what do you think about, is it fine for a writer to write about any person, any gender identity, that sort of story?
I think if you can do it well. Which doesn't, well is a broad term, but I would never say you can't. Sort of the largest discussion about this in recent years was The Help. Don't let's not go there. But that was a massive case of incredibly successful in terms of how the book sold, of a white woman really jumping in with both feet into a vision of an African American experience. And there was a lot of chat about, did she have the right to do this? How well did she do this? Whatever I think about the book, which I actually wrote about it, but so you can Google it. But then you'll know what I think about it. But I would defend her right to do that, to the end. And for myself as well, I write white characters. I don't even feel necessarily bound to always having mostly black characters, but so I guess that's a long way of saying I'm a writer who feels like you should be able to go wherever you want to go. I think there is a tendency to write within whatever your thing is, your experience, and I think it's cool when people really want to step outside that experience. I would say I struggle a little sometimes when the writer sort of isn't comfortable doing it. I read a book some time ago, I'm not going to name any names, but it was based on a spectacular race-based legal case, and the writer seemed to feel so uncomfortable what she was. It was the O.J. Simpson trial. I'll just say that. and she seemed very uncomfortable with how complicated that was, and it came through in the book. You know, just her discomfort. It's like she was sort of apologizing for having done it. This is a white writer, and that, you know, God bless her for giving it a shot. I would not have tried that. That, you know, that case was so complicated in so many ways. But that said, go ahead. You definitely should give it a shot. It's a long way of saying, yes, I stand by people's right to whatever. Yeah.
And I do too, but I think I've never written from the point of view of a black character, for example. And only just because I think, you know, I just don't know the black experience well enough to do it, whereas I feel like, you know, well, you know what, I mean, apparently, you know. Actually, you know what, just to go a little further, that's interesting, because my first book, the one that's over there, Fall of Rome, is a male. The main character's a man, and I never find that man-woman hard. One thing that is interesting I think about race in this country, though, is that those of us of color know a lot more about white culture, because we have to. You know, that's what we're moving through often, and so for me, in a funny way, it's not as much of a leap. Now that said, you know, this is not on you. I would never tell anyone what they should write either. You have to write from what comes from within you. But I think that's something that's at play for a writer of color, is where you fit into that context as well. So, yeah. I think you were first, yeah.
I'm curious to know what both of you read when you're on vacation.
Do you want me to go?
Go right ahead.
What do I read on vacation?
Or anytime.
It varies. You know, one of my favorite beach reading experiences was last year was The Hunger Games. You know, I started reading that in the car because the kids were bored, and by the time I got through, it was my daughter, she's 12, got through the first chapter, I said, you're not getting this back. I read it in a day. That was an amazing, and you know, when you get a really good beach read, it's very, very pleasurable. So that's a heck of a book in that, you know, in that way. But also, it's not badly written or dumb. Nope, don't want to knock anybody's taste, but for example, like Twilight, you know, I really struggle with poor writing, which The Hunger Games does not have. In terms of, you know, some of my favorite writers, whatever season, Michael Chabon, I'm a big fan of. Early Toni Morrison. I don't love all her books. The Bluest Eye and Sula and Song of Solomon mean a lot to me. I've heard the new one is really great. She can be a little uneven, but she's a genius, you know what I mean? But she's not, you know, her books vary in quality, I think. Don't tell me I said that. I think Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day is a really important book to me. It's always harder for me to name writers that I love all their work. Jane Smiley's The Age of Grief.
That's a great one.
Yeah. It's always hard when people ask to just say. But
that's why I let you go first. I could compose my thoughts. So I have been reading, I've been on a real crime fiction binge over the past few years. And I'm actually, I wonder if one of the things that's going on in my mind is I actually want to write one, only because, you know, I really love the pacing, and I love the idea that, you know, once you start, you know, you've got to go. And the one that made the biggest impression on me recently was this writer Richard Stark, who wrote the Parker novels. So Richard Stark is a pen name for Donald Westlake, and he wrote.
Okay.
No, he's Richard Bachman.
Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead.
And there are about 20 of these novels, and they're all about, you know, heists gone wrong. And Parker is this sort of brutal, business-like character. And you know, the book will, you know, the first sentence will be something like, Parker kicked the door in, you know, and you're just like in the middle of the thing. And you know, what I found is, you know, that I've been trying to figure out ways to use that sort of pacing in literary novels, but just because, you know, there's just that moment where, you know, I don't know, I just found it hard to deny the fact that I was like much more excited about, you know, these crime novels than I was by a lot of the literary fiction that I was reading. And so that's what had begun as a sort of guilty pleasure or a sideline has become, you know, just like a constant bit of thinking now, like especially in a world where, you know, it gets harder and harder to find readers. And I see it in my own kids, you know, they're so much less patient with any kind of narrative, you know, like let's watch this movie, it's a great movie. You know, like I wanted to show them Dazed and Confused because I just, you know, love this movie. And I just realized, like, I thought they would love it, you know, but I think it was just like, what is this? It's so slow and it's just episodic, and I could just feel like this sense of being underwhelmed, you know, and I think that's like a cultural symptom now, and I feel like I've just, something in me has like absorbed this idea that people are really easily bored, and that I've started to become more easily bored, you know, and you know, I think crime fiction has always accepted the idea that people are easily bored. You know?
They're ahead of everybody else. Oh, was there another hand? I'm sorry.
My question's a few bounces back, but I just did, before you were talking about, you know, crossing race or ethnicity in your writing, so much of it feels like suburbia is a character in many of your novels, and the way the ordinary and the extraordinary can live bizarrely side by side in a suburban environment, you know, is captured so beautifully in your books. And so I just wondered kind of if suburbia continues to capture your imagination, if so, you know, how that is or isn't thought of for your next work.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is another interesting question. So when I wrote Little Children, for the longest time, I said, this is a book about a sex offender in a small town. That was really how I thought of it. And it didn't really, I never said to myself, this is a book about suburbia. But my publisher, without even discussing with me, they never wanted to say the word sex offender anywhere, right? And this became like a suburban satire. And remember, the first time I was on Fresh Air, I prepared to talk about Little Children. I was so nervous. I'm going to really be good on this show. And so I had all these talking points, and I was fully prepared. And Terry Gross essentially asked me the question that you just asked. And I just went blank. You know, why are you so fascinated with suburbia? And what I really wanted to say was, you know, I'm not. You know, I'm fascinated with the way people behave, and the people I know best, you know, live in this place. It wasn't like I thought, you know, oh, I could set Little Children anywhere in the world. I choose suburbia because I'm fascinated with suburbia. It was just the story was always just embedded with, you know, embedded in that context. And so to me, it's sort of just background. It's just, you know, I'm interested in human beings. They just happen to be, you know, homo suburbanists or something.
Anybody else? Well, thank you both so much.